Welcome back to Storyteller's Hearth, where legends flicker to life in the firelight. Tonight, in Part 2, The Waves Claim Their Due, we continue with our tale of how youthful recklessness and unmerited arrogance once changed the course of English history and affected the lives of ordinary people for generations. But, for the White Ship incident, we might not have had King Stephen and his devastating struggle with Empress Matilda, nor King John who signed the Magna Carta, which governs our lives to this day. In Part 1 we left off when the revelry aboard the White Ship had reached a crescendo. Wine had been flowing freely, as laughter rang out, and the revelers were throwing caution to the wind. But before we witness the tragedy unfold, a word to our new listeners. If you haven't yet watched Part 1, Feast of the Doomed, we urge you to begin there. The full weight of this story lies in its unraveling. For those of you who have journeyed with us so far, thank you. Your love of history and legends keeps these flames alive. If you've not yet subscribed, do so now, for the hearth burns brighter with every new voice gathered around it. And if this tale moves you, share it, lest past mistakes be forgotten. Now let us recap what we saw happening in Part 1 on that chilly night in 1120. It was almost getting too late in the year for a channel crossing. They were entering the winter season when the weather conditions in the channel are apt to change very rapidly with very little warning. But for the celebrators on the White Ship, the pride of Normandy was now a floating palace of laughter and spilled wine. And because the signs of changing weather were the last thing on their minds, they went unnoticed. At its heart of the festivity was Prince William Atheling, sometimes called Adalin, son of King Henry and heir to the English throne, who was high on his father's achievements in France, youthful swagger, and French vintage. They had toasted and recounted their king's major triumph at the Battle of Braymoul, which had led to King Louis accepting young William as the Duke of Normandy. Emboldened by the wine, they began to mock their king's slower fleet that carried the king's army and their parents. We now revisit the party in Part 2 when they are about to set sail and race toward their destiny. Gather close now, for this is not mere history. This is the moment when a kingdom's future is about to be drowned beneath the waves. As the sun dipped below the horizon on November 25th, casting a golden glow over the harbor, the festive atmosphere reached its peak. The crew of the White Ship, emboldened by wine and the excitement of the journey, began to boast of their vessel's speed. "We'll soon catch the king's ship," one cried, raising his goblet in a toast. The young nobles, caught up in the revelry, cheered in agreement. For them, the voyage was not merely a journey, it was a challenge, a chance to prove their mettle and cement their place in history. Yet, as the first stars began to twinkle in the night sky, no one could have foreseen the darkness that lay ahead. The White Ship was packed to capacity, carrying an estimated 300 souls, a mix of high-born nobles, their attendants, and approximately 50 crew. On board were the who is who of the next generation of the Anglo-Norman world, their lives intertwined with the destiny of the realm. Yet, as they laughed and drank, few paused to consider the weight of their numbers or the risks of the journey ahead. But, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the deck, a subtle tension began to creep in. The wind, once gentle, now carried a biting chill, and the waves, once calm, grew choppy and restless. The crew, their judgment clouded by drink, paid little heed to the changing conditions. "A little wind never hurt anyone," one sailor laughed, sloshing wine onto the deck. Thomas Fitzstephen, though sober, was equally dismissive. "The White Ship can handle worse than this," he boasted, his voice tinged with overconfidence. Most of the passengers, too, seemed oblivious to the dangers. For them, the voyage was a challenge, a chance to prove their daring, and a path to the boasting rights of being with the prince on the fastest channel crossing ever. Besides, they trusted in the most illustrious sea captain of the day. "Make sure we catch up and get ahead of the king's ship," one adolescent nobleman suggested. His words met with cheers of approval. The idea took hold, and soon the crew was preparing to set sail at full speed. Yet, as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, a faint unease lingered in the air, a whisper of foreboding among the more cautious that went unheeded. The white ship, for all its beauty and speed, was no match for the capriciousness of the sea, and the night ahead would test its limits in ways no one could have imagined. In a few hours, all but one of the 300 souls on board would be lost, leaving behind a legacy of grief and a kingdom teetering on the brink of chaos. As the white ship set sail from Barfleur, bound for Southampton, the night was alive with music and laughter as the bow sliced through the dark waters, the wake barely visible in the blackness of the sea. The ship's deck was a scene of jubilant chaos, its passengers caught up in the thrill of the voyage. Lanterns swayed from the mast, casting a warm golden glow over the revelers, while the sound of lutes and drums mingled with the crash of waves against the hull. Prince William, at the center of it all, raised his goblet high, his voice ringing out above the din. "To England!" he cried. His words met with cheers and the clinking of cups. The air was thick with the scent of wine and salt spray, and the mood was one of unbridled celebration and optimism. But beneath the surface of merriment, a rivalry was brewing. The white ship, with its sleek design and towering mast, was the pride of the fleet, and its crew was always eager to prove its superiority over the rest of the fleet. As the king's vessel, a slower but more stately ship, had left before them, the crew of the white ship grew impatient. "We can't let them beat us," one sailor shouted, his voice slurred with drink. The idea of a race took hold, and soon the passengers joined in, their competitive spirits ignited. "Let's show them what the white ship can do," William declared, his eyes gleaming with excitement. The crew, emboldened by the prince's enthusiasm, began to set sail with renewed vigor, their laughter echoing across the water. As the white ship surged forward along the Normandy coast towards Barfleur Point, its bow cutting through the waves like a blade, the tension on board grew palpable. The crew, their movements increasingly erratic, struggled to maintain control of the vessel against the strengthening storm. The passengers, caught up in the excitement, cheered them on, their voices rising in a cacophony of sound that could be heard from the shore. Yet, as the first drops of rain began to fall and the stars disappeared behind a veil of clouds, a faint sense of foreboding settled over the ship. For the few cautious passengers, the unease was unbearable, but their warnings went unheeded. The white ship, for all its beauty and speed, was hurtling toward a fate that no one could have imagined, a fate that would leave the Anglo-Norman world forever changed. The white ship cut through the night like a blade, its sail taut and its hull slicing through the waves with reckless speed. On deck, laughter and music echoed into the darkness, the passengers blissfully unaware of the danger that loomed just ahead. But the sea, dark and unforgiving, had other plans. Without warning, the ship struck the Quille Boeuf rock, a rock hidden just beneath the churning surface, a mere 900 meters from shore. The impact was catastrophic. A deafening scrape tore through the air as the wooden hull shuddered and groaned, the vessel rolling violently to one side. For a moment, time seemed to freeze, the revelry replaced by stunned silence. Then chaos erupted. The ship lurched sharply, its mast cracking under the strain. Barrels of wine toppled over, their contents spilling across the deck and adding to the chaos. This caused the ship to tilt even further, throwing many passengers and crew alike into the icy, churning sea. Screams pierced the night, mingling with the relentless crash of waves. The white ship, once a symbol of pride and power, was now a death trap, its hull sinking with terrifying speed. Prince William, his face pale with shock, scrambled to save himself. Around him, the scene was pandemonium. Nobles and servants alike clawed at whatever was floating, their cries for help drowned out by the roar of the sea. Amid the chaos, William's bodyguards launched a small skiff that had been on board for ferrying people and goods to and from shore, and bundled him into it. The boat pushed away from the sinking ship, its occupants gasping for breath as they rowed toward safety. But, according to the chroniclers like William of Malmesbury and Orderic Vitalis, as they moved through the darkness, a voice cut through the night, a woman's voice, desperate and pleading. "William, help me! Don't abandon me so barbarously." It was Matilda, his half-sister, crouching in the sinking ship as the waves threatened to pull her overboard. William hesitated, his heart torn between survival and duty. Then, with a resolve born of desperation, he ordered the boat to turn back. "We cannot leave her," he shouted, his voice trembling with emotion. As the boat approached the wreck, the cries from the drowning grew louder. Dozens of survivors, their faces wild with panic, reached out in desperation. The small boat, already overloaded, was swarmed by countless desperate, menacing hands. William tried to maintain order, but it was no use. The weight of the anguished souls was too much, and with a heart-sinking lurch, the boat capsized, spilling William and the other occupants into the icy waters. William of Malmesbury wrote, "The water having washed some of the crew overboard and entering the chinks drowned others. The boat was launched, and the young prince getting into it might certainly have been saved by reaching the shore, had not his illegitimate sister, the Countess of Perche, now struggling with death in the larger vessel, implored her brother's assistance, shrieking out that he should not abandon her so barbarously. Touched with pity, he ordered the boat to return to the ship, that he might rescue his sister, and thus the unhappy youth met his death through excess of affection. For the skiff, overcharged by the multitude who leaped into it, sank and buried all indiscriminately in the deep. The sea was a maelstrom of chaos, its cold embrace swallowing the ship and its passengers whole. The screams of the drowning filled the night, a haunting chorus of despair. The water, black as ink, churned with the flailing limbs of those struggling to stay afloat. The air was thick with the sounds of choking and the desperate cries for help. But there was no rescue near. One by one, overcome by the numbing cold water, their voices fell silent, swallowed by the relentless waves. Amid this immense carnage, one man clung to life. According to Orderic Vitalis, Berold, a butcher from Rouen, had been among the few who had not joined in the revelry. The impact threw him against the side of the boat, but he managed to scramble onto a rock as the ship began to sink. Now he clung to a piece of wreckage, his hands numb from the cold and his body battered by the waves. Around him, the sea was littered with debris and the lifeless bodies of his fellow passengers. The screams had faded, replaced by the sound of flotsam beating against the cursed rock with each wave. Berold's mind raced as he struggled to stay afloat. He thought of his family, of the life he had left behind, and of the sheer improbability of his survival. The night stretched on, endless and unforgiving. But Berold refused to let go. He clung to the wreckage with desperate determination, his breath coming in ragged gasps as the cold seeped into his bones. As dawn finally began to break, and Berold, his strength entirely gone, was about to surrender to the lure of death, he was spotted by a search party and pulled to safety. He was the sole survivor of the disaster, a living testament to the fragility of life and the fickleness of fate. As he lay on the deck of the fishing boat, shivering and exhausted, he told the story of the lives that had been lost: the prince, the nobles, and the crew. The news of the White Ship disaster spread like a shadow across England and Normandy, carried by messengers whose faces were pale with shock. In the royal courts and humble villages alike, the tale was met with disbelief, then anguish. The ship had not arrived as expected, and as the hours went by, the truth became impossible to ignore. The White Ship was lost, and with it, nearly 300 souls, including Prince William Atheling, the heir to the throne. In Southampton, where King Henry I had been awaiting the arrival of his family, the news from across the Channel struck like a thunderbolt. The king, a man known for his iron will and unyielding demeanor, was said to have collapsed under the weight of his grief. His son, his pride, his hope for the future, gone in a single cruel stroke. Chroniclers would later write that Henry never again smiled, his face forever etched with the pain of a father who had outlived his child. He withdrew from public life. His once vibrant court had become a somber place, heavy with the weight of loss. The emotional toll rippled through the kingdom. In the great halls of the nobility, the great families of Normandy and England mourned the loss of their sons and daughters, their laughter and dreams extinguished by the cold waters of the Channel. The young elite of the Anglo-Norman world, those who had danced and toasted aboard the White Ship, were now nothing more than names whispered in sorrow. The court, once a place of celebration and ambition, became a place of mourning, its halls filled with the sound of weeping and the rustle of black robes. After Prince William's death, his wife Matilda returned to her family in Anjou. She later became a nun at Fontevraud Abbey, where she lived out the rest of her life in religious devotion. Her decision to enter a convent may have been influenced by the tragedy of losing her husband and the political upheaval that followed. The tragedy left a scar on the kingdom too, one that would not easily heal. The loss of Prince William and so many of the young nobility was not just a personal tragedy for King Henry and the families of the victims. It was a blow to the very fabric of the Anglo-Norman world. The future, once that seemed so bright and certain, now was shrouded in uncertainty. And as the kingdom mourned, the sea, cold and unfeeling, continued to roll on, each wave a reminder of the lives it had claimed. The sinking of the White Ship was more than a tragedy. It was a turning point in English history. With the death of Prince William, King Henry I was left without a male heir. He named his only legitimate surviving child, his daughter, Empress Matilda, as his successor. Upon Henry's death in 1135, his nephew, Stephen of Blois, being a grandson of William I, seized the throne from Matilda, plunging England into a bitter civil war between the two rival claimants known as the Anarchy. Stephen, a charismatic but indecisive ruler, had been one of the few nobles to avoid the White Ship disaster, having stayed behind in Barfleur due to illness. Matilda, Henry's daughter, was a formidable figure, but because of her haughty and imperious nature, her gender, and her marriage to Geoffrey of Anjou, who was deeply hated by the Anglo-Norman barons and was seen as an enemy, she had become unpopular with many of the English barons. The struggle between Stephen and Matilda dragged on for nearly 2 decades, tearing the kingdom apart and leaving a legacy of instability. The White Ship disaster marked the beginning of the end of Henry's dynasty. The Civil War weakened the monarchy, and the throne passed to Matilda's son, Henry II, founding the Plantagenet line. The tragedy became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the fragility of power and the consequences of hubris. Today, the wreck of the White Ship lies almost forgotten beneath the waves, a silent testament to lost potential and the folly of human ambition. Its story endures, not just as a historical event, but as a haunting symbol of what might have been. Lately, there have been attempts at surveying what is thought to be the remains of the White Ship's seaweed-covered deck, after sitting on the seabed for over 900 years. Thank you for joining us by the fire tonight. If you enjoyed this tale, please like, share, and subscribe to Storyteller's Hearth Fireside Tales. Your support helps us keep the flames alive and bring more legends to life. Until next time, may your stories be rich, your hearth be warm, and your imagination forever wander. Good night.